Yate, Shea Brian Young, Yenishia, Kachini Nishligo, Tatasate Basichin, Torachini Dashiche, Ako Tono Conche A da Chanela. Hi everyone, my name is Brian Young. I am red running into the Water Clan, born for the Tangle People Clan. My maternal grandmother's clan is Bitterwater, and my paternal grandfather's clan is Sour Water. I am an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, grew up in Fort Defiance, but am currently living in Brooklyn. And I just want to take a quick moment to do a land acknowledgement to the original caretakers of this land, the Lenni Lenape, who have been forcibly relocated to the Delaware, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin states. And it is my amazing and wonderful pleasure to be moderating tonight's conversation with Naima Coster, Dantiel Moniz, and Kirstin Valdez Quade. And I just want again to remind you all, we are broadcasting on Crowdcast, and we would love you very much to be a part of this conversation. The chat is open for your comments. PEN America staff will also be answering your questions in the chat throughout the event, as well as sharing information about the participants. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A bottom at the bottom of your screen for said questions. This event will be live captioned. Please see links in the chats for access, and we will provide periodic visual descriptions for the visually impaired individuals in our audience. And right now we are framed on the left side of the screen. There is branding for PEN America and PEN World Voice Festival in the corner, and there is a chat with lots of comments on the side. All right, so to start off, coming of age stories largely centered on the age range between 10 and 20 can cover broad subject matters such as first alcoholic beverages, learning to drive, graduating from high school, leaving your parents' house. And one of the first coming of age stories is in the first 4 books of Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey, otherwise known as the Telemachy. And in that realm of ancient mythic poem and poetic myth, Odysseus' son, Telemachus, grows up in the shadow of his father's 10-year absence and witnesses the chaos and destruction of that absence. Initially a weakling, Telemachus journeys across seas to search for his father, and in his search, physically and emotionally matures into an adult. And upon his return to his island, he is ready to reclaim his throne. And such has been the basis for the modern depictions of the coming of age narrative in Western literature. Young males, 10 to 20 years old, sets about a journey, grows strong enough to supersede his father's lineage. And thankfully, that narrative has grown to include more identities, more genders. And as an example, we have these 3 wonderful voices, and I will now introduce the authors and offer them space to share their pronouns as well as a brief description of themselves. But beforehand, I am currently wearing a black polo shirt with a wonderful lined background behind me. All right, so today we have Naima Coster, author of What's Mine and Yours, an instant New York Times bestseller, as well as a Read with Jenna and Book of the Month Club pick. Her debut, Halsey Street, was a finalist for the 2018 Kirkus Prize for Fiction and long listed for the VCU Cabell First Novelist Awards. Naima's essays have appeared in New York Times, Elle, Time, Quayle, the Paris Review Daily, The Cut, The Sunday Times, Catapult, and elsewhere. In 2020, she was named a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, and her most recent book, What's Mine and Yours, released March 2nd, 2021. All right, now we have Dantiel W. Moniz. Dantiel has been named a writer to watch by Publishers Weekly and Apple Books. Her debut collection, Milk, Blood, Heat, is an Indie Next Pick and an Amazon Best Book of the Month selection, a Roxane Gay Audacious Book Club pick, and has been hailed as a must-read by Time, Entertainment Weekly, BuzzFeed, Elle, and O, the Oprah magazine, amongst others. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review, Harper's Bazaar, Tin House, One Story, American Short Fiction, Plowshare, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, and elsewhere. She lives in Northeast Florida and currently teaches fiction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her Blood Milk book Heat released February 2nd, 2021. Last, most definitely not least, we have Kirstin Valdez Quade, the author of the novel The Five Wounds and the short story collection Night at the Fiestas. The latter was named a New York Times notable book and a best book of 2015 by the San Francisco Chronicle and the American Library Association. Kirstin is the recipient of a grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation and a Stegner Fellowship at Stanford. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, the Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Price Stories, New York Times, and elsewhere. She is currently an assistant professor at Princeton. All right, everyone. I'm going to offer this space and time to the authors to read 1 to 2 paragraphs of their works, and I will begin alphabetically with Naima Coster.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm honored to be in such wonderful company. I'm going to read from What's Mine and Yours, which is the story of 2 families that are brought together by the integration of a public high school in North Carolina. And this is from the perspective of one of the mothers in one of the families. It was a Wednesday, newly November, and Lacey May Ventura was raking the leaves in the yard. Her fingers were red and sore, and it occurred to her to check the gas tank behind the house. In the Piedmont, winter never announces itself. The days turn toward the cold and away from it, the first dusting of snow arriving gently without warning. Lacey May pulled up the metal lid and saw the needle on the gauge pointing down to 15%. She ran inside, still holding the rake, and dropped the heat down as low as she could stand. She passed the rest of the day in her good coat, a kettle boiling on the stove. She drank cup after cup of coffee to keep her hands warm, and by noon she was shaking from all the caffeine, her fingernails tinged with blue. She wanted her husband Robbie to call so she could ask how long 15% would last, but he didn't. She called the agency instead to ask if they'd found anything for her yet. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your wonderful words. I'm so excited to read it. Next, we have Dantiel W. Moniz and her book.
Hi, y'all. So happy to be here. Just as a visual description, I am a Black woman with locks, and I'm wearing bright red lipstick, if that is helpful at all to anybody. I'm going to read just the first little bit of the title story, Milk, Blood, Heat. 1. Monsters. Pink is the color for girls, Kira says. So she and Ava cut their palms and let their blood drip into a shallow bowl filled with milk, watching the color spread slowly on the surface, small red flowers blooming. Ava studies Kira, how she holds her hand steady, as if used to slicing herself open, while sunlight falls through the kitchen window and fills her curls with glow. Her mouth is a slim, straight line, but her eyes are wide, green-yellow, unblinking. Strange eyes, Ava's mother always says, with the same pinched grimace usually reserved for pulling plugs of their hair from the bathtub drain. The girls are at Kira's because her parents believe in freedom of expression, and they can climb trees and catch frogs and lie on the living room floor with the cushions pulled off the couch, watching cartoons and eating sugary cereal from metal mixing bowls for hours. At Ava's house, they are tomboys, they are lazy, they are getting on her mother's last nerve. Her mother doesn't approve of Kira, but they've been friends for 2 months, ever since late August when the 8th grade started, and Kira came up to her during gym and told her, "I feel like I'm drowning." And though there was no water in sight, Ava knew what she meant. It was the type of feeling she herself sometimes got, a heaviness, an airlessness that was hard to talk about, especially with her mother. Trying to name it was like pulling up words from her belly, bucketful after bucketful, all that effort, but they never meant what she wanted them to.
Thank you, Dantiel, for sharing that. And now we have Kirstin Valdez Quade reading from her book, The Five Wounds.
Hi, what a joy to be here. Just a physical description. I am a cisgender Latina with long, dark, curly hair. I'm wearing a black sweater, and I use she, her pronouns. I will be reading a couple paragraphs from my novel, The Five Wounds, which is set in a fictional small town in northern New Mexico, and it follows Amadeo Padilla, who is playing the role of Jesus in the town's Good Friday procession. He's thrown himself into the part. He thinks it will transform his life when his pregnant 16-year-old daughter shows up unannounced and informs him that she's moving in with him, and it derails all of his plans. So the novel follows a year in this family's life as they learn to heal from past wounds. This section is in Angel's point of view, the daughter, and it takes place at Smart Starts, which is the teen parent program she attends. Angel pinches the underside of her chin as she thinks. It's journaling time, and Brianna has told them to make a list of things they each need to make their own and their babies' lives better. The first few are easy. 1, GED or high school diploma and college degree. 2, a support system. 3, a car. 4, a driver's license. 5, a job. Here, Angel is stumped. If she got a job, who would take care of the baby? So she adds 6, a babysitter, a good one. But there is no such thing, not really, not unless your mom or grandma doesn't work. Even Angel knows that. Briefly, she considers her father, then dismisses the thought. Christy and Trinity are whispering. They are best friends and knew each other from before Smart Starts. We got pregnant like the same month, they're always telling people, which is either a crazy fluke or an organizational feat. Both possibilities depress Angel. Thank you.
I am so blown away by the paragraphs that you have shared with us, and I cannot wait to delve deeper into these amazing stories that you have crafted. All right, so we are shifting to our Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat, and in 30 minutes, we will open to the general public for Q&A. But to start, adolescence, early adulthood, are marked with massive challenges, both internal and external. And as authors, we have a direct hand in creating the obstacles, the conditions of growth for our characters. And can each of you describe the challenges that your protagonist or protagonists have to confront in your stories, as well as what inspired you to write about said challenges and what changed for the characters? And I will start with Naima.
Thank you for your question, Brian. And I'll share my visual description. I'm a Black Latina woman in her mid-30s with curly hair, wearing a black shirt, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. So in What's Mine and Yours, the challenges that my characters face really has to do with their family histories. I'm very interested in inheritance and what gets passed down. And so the trouble for the young people in my book begins with their parents. One of the mothers in my book suffers a terrible loss, and she has to figure out a way to move on, to reconstitute her dreams. And she's very focused on her son's survival. What that means for him is that he learns to put his grief away. He learns that his family history is something that he has to rise above, and that's shameful. His name is G, and he carries that with him into the integrating high school where he's one of the few new Black Black students. And the other mother in my book, Lacey May, is a woman who feels abandoned by her husband, who struggles with addiction and is in and out of her life. And so she's really focused on opportunity for her girls and protecting them. And she chooses to oppose the integration because she wants to hoard opportunity for her girls. Now, she's a white woman and her girls are half Latina. They have a Colombian father, and they react with shame at their mother's stance on the integration. And they also occupy this difficult position where they don't identify as white, they identify as people of color, but only some of the sisters are seen that way. One of the sisters is white presenting. And so they also have that trouble from their mother's views and politics. And that's really what the book looks at, how the children try to find their way out from under the stances and ideas and difficulties of their parents.
Thank you for that. And I just love that your book touches upon segregation and desegregation in a modern context, because we normally believe and think that it's like a historical thing and that we have progressed beyond it, but it's still happening. It's still happening. All right, Dantiel, same question to you. What are the challenges and how do the characters change, as well as what inspired it?
Yeah, so my collection, I think of it as linked, even though usually people don't think of short stories as linked unless the characters are the same. One of my projects with the book was to expand a reader's idea, or anybody's idea, of what constitutes a link, you know. So for me, I'm definitely, coming of age is definitely one of the things that I was focused on, but I don't think of coming of age as something that only the young do. I think that all of us are continuously coming of age, because to me, coming of age is getting new knowledge about yourself or the world or the people around you. And you can do that at any age. And hopefully if you're alive and you're still open to growth, right, that's always happening. So for example, there are a lot of stories that deal with people who are, 13 and they're kind of, okay, so I'm not an adult yet, I'm still a child, but like all of the world is kind of has all these expectations on me, but nobody will talk to me honestly about why these things are in place, these laws, these rules. And I'm now responsible for adults, like interactions and engagements with me, but like no one will be honest. But also there's a character in my book who is an older man. He's in his 60s. And I still think of him as coming of age, too. So it's just about, these new knowledges that these characters get, and do they choose to go forward with that new knowledge, or do they turn away from it? Because in a way, inaction can also be action, right? It's still the consequences of what happens if you make a choice or you choose to not make a choice.
I definitely feel like I'm still coming of age. Just the other day, a young person came up to me and it's like, Mr., and called me sir. I'm like, man, am I that old? And I was referred to as an elder from someone in my nation. And she's like, oh man, I still don't see myself as like an adult. I still ask for my mom's hand sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm still looking for the adult in the room, and sometimes I'm surprised that it's me. So like, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah.
When I get overwhelmed, like, I need an adult. All right, Kirsten, same question to you.
Yes, I mean, I'm right there with you, Dantiel. I think all of the characters in my novel really are coming of age. I mean, the most obvious story arc, coming of age story arc, is Angel. She's 16 years old. She's a brand new mother. She's facing this extraordinary responsibility. She's also beginning to take her own desires seriously, and she comes to understand that she is queer, and she falls in love with another student in her teen parent program. And, so hers is sort of a typical coming of age story. But her father, Amadeo, is technically an adult, but in many ways he's more of an adolescent than Angel is. He's a failed father. He's unemployed. He still lives with his mother and mooches off of her and receives, spending money. He's an alcoholic. He's really unequal to the challenges of caring for the people around him. And so that's what he has to learn to do over the course of the novel. And, he wants to do better. He wants to be a better father and a better son. And that's ultimately what propels him, but it's an uphill battle for him. And his mother Yolanda discovers at the beginning of the novel that she has terminal cancer, and that is another kind of coming of age for her. She comes to understand what it means to leave this life and what it will mean to leave behind her children and grandchildren and now great-grandchild, who all have depended on her so much. But yes, I mean, I agree. I think, we are always growing, and hopefully, I mean, that's the idea. And if literary fiction is about character change, then it, I think every story is a coming of age.
That is very, very wise, and I'm so glad that you all brought that up. All right, so going off of that, the internal and external, not only are the preteen and teenage years hugely formative and inform who we become into our adult years, we are also kind of figuring out who we are in that age range. And I guess we continually are figuring out who we are. But as people of color, externally, society begins to define us as well, starts to put us into boxes, if you will. They define us and our experiences, and often we reject it. Specifically, Naima's What's Mine and Yours, various characters tell G how to be a black man. For Dantiel, Milk, Blood, and Heat, there is a character that is rejecting the good young girl trope. And Kirstin's 5 Wounds, Amadeo is gifted a book, Breaking Free from Male Rage. Can you all just kind of touch on the societies that are reflected in your book and what inspired them and how the characters interact / confront those expectations? And we are going to start with Dantiel, go to Kirstin, and then Naima.
Yeah, so in the book, most of the characters are young Black women and girls, and there's a main protagonist as well. But I think that for me, it was very important to acknowledge the reality of the world that we live in, which means talking about the systems that govern our lives, that shape a life. So, most of the stories are touching on white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, class, and in some form or another, whether directly or not. So that was really important for me to put on the page to acknowledge. But I also wanted to make sure that these characters weren't just like, oh, my race is a problem. Oh my God, it's my race. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you just wake up and you're dealing with the same things that everyone has to deal with. Is this relationship working for me? What's next in my life? Who am I? What have I done? What am I doing? So it was important that, that stuff was on the periphery, because that's true. Like, you could be, going to lunch and then the person at the counter doesn't greet you. And it's like, okay, that just entered, but it's like a second. And then now you're back to, should I keep this pregnancy or whatever it is? So the story that you were referring to, Tongues, the main character is, growing up in the church, and she's starting to realize that the things that she's being told, there's a level underneath those words that she's being told, and it's some sort of control that's directed towards her and her female body, and she's trying to kind of navigate, like, what does that mean for her, and does she have to go along with it just because everybody that she knows has already? So my stories are basically like putting people in their real human lives, but just making sure that I acknowledge that this is how my life has been shaped, or these characters' lives have been shaped, and like, what does that look like, and where do we go from that?
And Kirstin?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Amadeo is facing societal pressure. I think one of Amadeo's problems actually is that people expect very little of him. His mother expects very little of him. His daughter expects nothing of him because he has not shown himself capable of being present. And, so he has to learn to expect more of himself. And I think that is a result of a lot of the responsibility falling on the shoulders of the women in his family. And, Angel really faces a lot of societal pressures as a 16-year-old new mother who has grown up in this small town in a Catholic context. She is told by some people at school that she's a slut because she's had sex, and her own family members are really uneasy about her sexuality, and she becomes aware that she's queer and has to decide whether or not to reveal that to her Catholic family. And I think part of what she is reconciling is all of these messages that she should feel ashamed for having gotten pregnant, for being queer, for being a single mother and a kid who can't yet support her child financially. Reconciling all of these messages that she should feel ashamed with actually her own, for largely, she doesn't feel ashamed. She sort of celebrates falling in love. She celebrates her child. And so that's a really tricky balance for her. And she does absorb a lot of those pressures.
Thank you for that wonderful answer. Naima?
I love hearing both of you talk about your works and the ideas that come up in all of our works or that circulate, like shame and that lack of shame, depending on the character. For my character, G, when he enters the newly integrated high school, he meets a Black teacher named Mr. Riley who hopes to motivate and inspire him, and who tells him that he now has the opportunity to be a torch who lights the way for others. It's a line from the Shakespeare play Measure for Measure, which ends up being produced in my book. And this advice to G is just totally crushing. The idea that now that he's in this school, he has to in some way be exemplary and prove his belonging in a way that his white peers do not. That's certainly something that I felt as a young person, as one of the few people of color in many of the educational spaces that I was in. I've continued to feel it in my adulthood and to reckon with it. And so he has that instruction for life that his mother tries to counter. Thankfully, he has her to resist that logic, but she counters it sort of in a different way and with a different set of instructions. She says, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You just need to approve of yourself, and you don't need anybody's approval, which she also means to be liberating. But G is an anxious young man in this difficult position, of course, needs approval and needs approval from others in a way that's perhaps unattractive to say aloud, but he certainly needs to know that his mother approves of him. And he needs to know that at least some of his peers approve of him. And so his journey is one of looking for connection and tenderness, which he can't really find in his mother, although she's his champion in many ways. And also figuring out how to determine his own path forward in the face of all of these competing expectations, because there isn't just one set or one vision, but none of the visions he encounters are authored by him.
And really quick, Naima, you went to a private boarding school for high school, right?
I went to it was a day school, but I was a scholarship kid at a private all-girls school, which was a trip.
Yeah, I actually was also a scholarship kid into the Hotchkiss School in Northwestern Connecticut, and that was its own just like hugely formative thing for me, because growing up on the reservation, like I was surrounded by Navajos. It was just like 100%, 99.9% Navajo population, and then going to an all-white school, that was the first time I felt that I was Native American, because people were defining me by that, and I wasn't my initial definition of myself. Like, first and foremost, I'm Brian, but going out of the reservation and into a predominantly affluent white society was really when I started to recognize that I was Native American. But yeah, this is really amazing answers, everyone. I'm so very happy. So one thing that kind of arose from your answers is the theme of motherhood. With Navajos, our society is considered matriarchal, so women are considered to be equal, or if not, have some higher elevated status in men in most scenarios and cases and ceremonies. So it was really weird coming into this Western society where men have, for whatever reason, a higher status than women. Why is that? But anyways, I think something that is lacking in most coming of age stories, and even my own story, Healer of the Water Monster, I don't have a mother-son relationship, though it does have a grandma-son relationship. These relationships, female relationships, specifically with a mother figure, offer a different dynamic than a father-offspring relationship. So I was just wondering if you guys could you ladies can touch on that dynamic and that relationship between your characters and the mothers, or the mothers and their offspring, and how that differs from the traditional, male society. And we are going to start with Kirsten, go to Naima, and then Dantiel.
Yeah, I also absolutely grew up in a matriarchy. The women ran the show, continue to run the show, and the same is true with the Padilla family in my novel. Yolanda keeps everyone together. She supports everyone. She gives everybody advice, and at a real cost to herself. She has ignored her own needs for much of the time. And Angel grew up with her mother, who was a single mother, and Angel really was her mother's companion, her mother's helper. She took on a lot of responsibility really early on, and watched as her mother had various boyfriends, and so she, in some ways, grew up very, very early, and she sort of takes. I don't want to say she takes naturally to the role of being a mother to this new infant, but it's not surprising to her that she is expected to step up and take on this enormous responsibility and be there for her child. And it's also not really a surprise to her that her mother and her father have not been present for her. So yeah, I mean, I think this really, even though the main through line in my novel is the father-daughter relationship between Amadeo and Angel, the idea of mothering is a major, major theme. Angel learns to be a mother, learns and learns to demand more of both her mother and her father.
Thank you, Kirsten. Naima?
My novel takes place over 25 years. And I think that one of the pleasures of that long time span for me as a writer was being able to look at the mothers in my book at different points in their lives, as well as the children at different points in their lives. I think that it's easy to assume that motherhood is an all-consuming identity that dissolves the woman that the mother was before, and then she's remade and reconstituted. And I think that long time span allows me to resist that a bit in the novel and show how the women who are mothers in this book change over time, the things that they desire, and the parts of their identity that are not altered by having children, and that make having children complicated because they have the same hangups, histories, wants that they did before. And in terms of the particularities of being a mother, I think that I was considering not just gender, but what it means to be a primary caregiver in particular, to be the one who's really tasked with the survival of the family. Both of the mothers in the book, Jade and Lacey May, find themselves alone. Like they're the ones who are left, whether because their partner is struggling with addiction or is gone. And that's a position, that position of isolation and responsibility that I wanted to investigate. I think that we can be very hard on mothers or primary caregivers because of patriarchy, but also because of the great power that we see that primary caregivers have in the shaping of their children's lives. And one of the things that I look at in my book is the way that the mothers know the tremendous power and responsibility they have. They're aware of the influence they have on their children. And it's one of the things that makes their pursuing their own desires alongside the needs of their children so fraught and interesting.
Awesome. Thank you for that wonderful answer. Dantiel, on to you.
Yeah, I want to say, Naima, one of the things I really appreciated about your book were the moments where Jade and Lacey May were maybe not tender with their children. You know what I mean? Where the frustration boiled over and it was just like, okay, this is the way that it is. Because I do think that there is this tendency to put mothers on a pedestal in a way in which they cannot be imperfect, and all humans are imperfect. So one of the things that I wanted to do in portraying mothers was be like, you are a human. Outside of this role as a mother. There's actually a story in my book where the daughter is looking at her mother from afar and she's like, oh, wow, she has the thought for the very first time, like this is my mom's first time on the earth, just like me. And she's doing the best that she can. And I think that, that sounds like a really basic observation to say, but I don't think that it is. I think that we have all of these roles and expectations for the people in our lives, whether that's our parents, our partners, our friends, whatever it is. And we then see them in that role as a fixed thing. But it's like, you're a whole person outside of this, and it's your first life in this body. You're doing the best that you can. And so that's kind of, for me, I don't think I could have written these coming of age type stories without having that relationship and that acknowledgement. There are mothers in my book who are not perfect mothers who know that, and still they kind of, sit in their own power like that. There are grandmothers as mothers in my book. There are, that kind of thing. So it's just what does that relationship look like? It's actually the thing that I didn't know that I was writing toward. I knew I was kind of writing toward, what is morality, and is it conditional or situational? And then the other question, the secret question was, what is it to bring children into this world? To care for children in a world that, for the most part, especially if you're marginalized in any way, is kind of already putting you in these boxes, these limitations. So what does that mean? And should we be doing it? And what does it look like? So, I think that, specifically motherhood, there are fathers in my book too, but even when the father is present, it's still most of the responsibility and the shame and the guilt and the responsibility falls on the women in my book.
Awesome. I guess I got one more question for you all, and then we will go to the public Q&A. And with Navajo's Mother Nature, Mother Earth, Nahadzan Shema, is definitely a huge source of support for us. And with that in mind, I would love for you to talk about the settings in your books. Dantiel, you are, evoking Florida, and from the reviews I've read, you do an amazing job just having that atmosphere and the humidity of Florida translate into your book. And Naima, North Carolina, and that kind of setting for racial tension is palpable. Kirstin, you have New Mexico with a fictionalized city. Can you tell us the name of that really quick? Is it New Paseo?
The fictional small town is Las Penas.
Las Penas, yes. All right. So can you just talk a little bit about the environments of your stories and how they either created/destroyed space for discoveries for your characters, as well as either creating or destroying room for the self-expression of your characters or character? And I guess we'll start back with Naima, Dantiel, and then Kirstin.
So I lived in North Carolina for 3 years before I started writing the book, but I was thinking through questions of motherhood and class mobility and what gets passed down. So it seemed like the fitting setting for this book that kicks around those themes, because it was sort of the actual landscape for the emotional landscape of the book. I wanted to write about the land. I wanted to write about longleaf pines and creeks and the environment of Durham, North Carolina. But I also wanted to write about diverse cities and the tensions that exist in those cities that perhaps get glossed over in the narratives of the place. When I first moved to Durham, something that I heard often said with pride was that it was a city with no racial majority, which is true, but which is not to say that it's a utopia and that there aren't real difficulties and tensions. And, I heard that as a New Yorker, where we're an exceedingly diverse city, but also have one of the most segregated school systems in the United States. So I was really interested in looking at an urban place that had so many opportunities for crossings between people from different walks of life, but places that were still marked by staunch divisions. And the Piedmont region of North Carolina allowed me to do both things, the land and then also play with this social history of school integration.
Excellent. Thank you, Naima. Dantiel?
Yeah, it was really important for me to write about Florida, and in particular where I come from, because I don't see very many stories about Jacksonville in specific. Like recently, thank God, we have Deisha Filial and Donnie Walton, who are doing big things. They're also from Jacksonville, where I'm from. So that's been really gratifying to see that. But I never grew up thinking Florida in general was a particularly literary place. You get the portrayal of Florida in the news. You get Florida Man and all of that stuff. And so for me, it was really important to contribute to the stories that come out of the place where I'm from in a way that didn't contribute to stereotypes, so I just wanted it to be these are stories that are worth telling here. There are people here that are worth writing about, characters here. They're real stories, because you get the sense that, great literature can only happen in certain places, whether that's New York or, someplace big city type place. And it's that's not true. That's elitism. So I just wanted to make sure that I wrote about my home, but also the way that the atmosphere reflects. I'm glad you said that about the atmosphere, because for me, it was less important to depict the accuracy of street names more than to get that mood of the place, the heat or the absence of heat, because I'm in North Florida. So it does get cold here. I know people are okay, cold, but we can get to 20 degrees. Okay. We've had frost on the ground. It gets cold here. So basically I just wanted to talk about how the weather and the climate reacts on characters. And so I hope that comes across in the stories.
Place is so central to my work. Most of my work does take place in northern New Mexico. That's where my family is from, and we have a really deep history there. And that landscape is just such a sort of fertile soil for my fiction, I think, because it's a place I love, and it's also a place that it really confounds me. The history of New Mexico, the Southwest in general, but especially northern New Mexico, is of conquest and reconquest and reconquest. And so there's just, centuries of violence and pain that is still palpable. It's all of that is absolutely alive. The Spanish conquest of Native Americans push really, really bloody land grabs, and then the conquest of the U.S. government taking land. And it's such a heavily romanticized region. There is no shortage of art about northern New Mexico, and it's in the 20th century. It was largely produced by Anglo outsiders. You think of George O'Keeffe and Ansel Adams and Willa Cather and D.H. Lawrence, and they really contributed to this heavily romanticized image of the place. And that's something that I really wanted to push back against. I think part of what that image does, and is erase so much of the experience of people who live there and who whose land has been taken, and it erases a lot of the poverty and addiction and a lot of the the extraordinary beauty and strength of the place. So that's a sort of myth that I have always been interested in working with, and my characters absolutely contend with this long history. That the centuries history is definitely present for all of the characters, even though it's a very contemporary story.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I could just keep asking all three of you questions all day. But we do have some excellent questions that I'm going to read, and we'll just start off at the top. What are some of your own favorite coming of age stories? Are there any of these stories you wish you'd have gotten to read when you were younger? And I'm going to open up the room, so whoever wants to answer first, go right ahead.
I'll start. So actually, one of the ones that is the reason why I write about what I write about, and that I felt like I had the permission to, was White Oleander. I came across that when I was 14 in the school library, and I thought, they don't know this book is here. They would not let us have this book, because it grappled with like coming of age and motherhood and like imperfect mothers so messily and so honestly, and it was like kind of raunchy, especially for me being 14. So I was like, oh, but like I didn't know that you could write about personhood and motherhood and like discovering yourself and sex and all those things until I read that book that way. And so I have a lot to credit for Janet Fitch for writing that book and allowing us to have it.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
Oh, a really important book for me was Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street. I mean, I don't think, I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't think I was ever once assigned any literature by a Latino author in high school, college, graduate school. Never once, I don't think. Even Junot Diaz, who's so anthologized, I read on my own. But a friend of mine was assigned The House on Mango Street for her high school class, and it was sitting on her desk, and I read it, and it blew my mind. I mean, it's such a beautiful account of a childhood and of growing up, but it meant so much to me personally, and made me really think that writing was a possibility.
I love that the book gave you a sense of possibility, and for you too, Dantiel. I feel that I feel similarly about Breath Eyes Memory by Edwidge Danticat, which I loved as a reader, but also found so empowering as a writer. I found it early in high school. A high school English teacher gave it to me and said, "I think you'll like this," and it's the story of a mother and a daughter and their fraught relationship. And it was one of the first contemporary novels I read that looked closely at how national history could be a presence in such an intimate relationship, how the mother's past in Haiti was always present in their apartment in Brooklyn and shaped the way she connected to her daughter, the way she was alienated from her daughter, the way she harmed her daughter. And that spoke so much to my sense of my experience coming from an immigrant family where there were lives that had taken place in the Caribbean before that felt like real presences, even if I didn't fully understand the national histories. And so I love that book. I think my first book, Halsey Street, is in conversation with it in many ways, without my knowing it. And it's just wonderful, and Edwidge Danticat is incredibly prolific and has written many, many other fabulous coming of age stories as well.
Wonderful. I'm going to do a quick plug for my own book, Healer of the Water Monster. Is my personal coming of age story right now, just because with Native children and Native authors, like there's like 1% of books published for Native Americans by Native American authors. And I think that is emblematic of not just Natives, but also people of color, that we are disproportionately represented, especially in the younger reader market. Like I believe 2018 was the last kind of census. There was like 50% devoted specifically to white children, and then 27% were animal protagonists, and the rest, people of color, were the were the 23% that just divided up amongst us. So there is definitely like room and need for stories that depict people of color going through the coming of age era narrative. All right, next question. How do you think of your reader? Are you writing to people from within the same community as your characters, or to an outside reader? Are you pushing against the white gaze? And again, whoever wants to start, Dantiel, looks like.
Yeah, I'll start. I would say that even just saying like, are you pushing up against the white gaze is somehow centering the white gaze as like an opposition in the writing. And so I would say for me, I'm my audience. I'm my ideal audience. Like, you know, for me, I keep thinking about that Toni Morrison quote of, you know, if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written, then you must write it. So for me, I'm always kind of like my first audience where I'm thinking, what would I want to read? Would I be interested in? What would I have been interested in? And then so that makes it so that no matter what I write and it goes out to the public, where you really can't control other people's opinions or thoughts, or if they're going to engage with your work, if anybody beyond myself is like, oh, I really like this, it spoke to me, then it's a cherry. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, great. That's really great. But for me, I just wanted to, you know, write Black women and girls that were not monolithic, because Blackness is not a monolith. Like, it's not, you know, I can't write, like, you know, there's some people like, oh, are you writing the Black experience? This is no capital B, capital E Black experience, because you can't do that. This is these characters who are Black, who are experiencing the world in these ways that I'm writing. So I would say that I didn't particularly write the book for everyone, but I do think anyone can, you know, be touched by the work.
I'll pick up on that, if I may, and say that, you know, one of the things that I'm always trying to trouble in my work is even the idea of community and what the boundaries are of community, who belongs, who's left out. You know, there are many ways that I claim all kinds of communities, but feel myself very much at the intersection of different communities. You know, like if I were to write to Dominican readers, like which Dominican readers, half Dominican like me, like Dominican first generation, like Dominican on the island, queer Dominicans, like which Dominicans. And I feel similarly about all of the different communities that I'm speaking to women, like which women, where, with what histories. So I don't think so much about which communities my characters belong to, because those communities are fraught and sticky and have so many overlapping experiences within them. Like Dantiel, I write for myself. And when the writing is going well, I'm mostly thinking about the character's mind and trying to push deeper into that mind, rather than thinking about some other mind and its assessment, connection to, or alienation from the person I'm trying to understand on the page.
I think that's so beautifully put. And I would say that really, really echoes my own thinking about audience. You know, so often, you know, I think there were times in my life when I was, you know, in graduate school, my audience was the other people in my workshop. and that's about as far as I was imagining. You know, the idea of an unknown reader finding my work was just inconceivable at that point. Of course, you know, it's what I wanted, but I think, you know, sometimes I'm writing for a particular person. I have a person in my life in mind who I'm writing this story for. But, you know, I really think that I am thinking about my characters. I often, as I'm writing, I ask myself if my characters, if Angel were to read this account of her life, would she feel that I had represented her fairly and that I was capturing the complications and nuance and contradictions of what it is to be her? So that's, I think that's where my primary loyalty is. Am I allowing the characters to be fully human and complicated? And I just hope that, you know, it's entertaining and moving and that an audience will come along with me.
Wonderful. Thank you for these amazing and thoughtful answers. And I'm just going to plug into myself. For me and writing Healer of the Water Monster, my primary audience was young Navajo readers, at least when I was first initially starting the story. But towards the middle process, it was gearing towards the characters and their emotional experience. But all right, everyone, we are running up on our time, and I would just love to spend more time, but unfortunately, that is not the case. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us this Monday, or this morning or afternoon, depending where you are at in the world. The Penn World Voices Festival isn't over, so please visit penn.org/festival to hear more from your favorite authors. Thank you. Have a great day. And again, thank you, Dantiel. Thank you, Naima. Thank you, Kirsten. And thank you, audience, for joining us. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. What a privilege.